Walters is back for another season as the official bar of the Nats Chat podcast. Walters is the best spot to go before and after home games, located at the southeast corner of Capitol and N Street, right across the street from the ballpark.
And welcome to Nats Chat for Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. Welcome to what I do believe is the first ever emergency installment of the Nats Chat podcast. You know, there are installments of the podcast, and then there is the rare emergency installment of the pod. We are in rarefied air in the history of this podcast. I'm Al Galdi, host of the Al Galdi podcast. I'm joined by the man who founded and who runs the Nats Chat podcast, Tim Shovers. Well, Tim, you would know. Is this the first ever emergency installment of this podcast?
Amazingly so, Al. Yes, it is. And I think that it mainly speaks to the lack of activity in the free agent market for the Nationals more than anything. But yeah, it took us until season 5 to get here. And here we are, early March 2025.
Well, we have an emergency installment of this podcast for a very good reason. Seismic news on Monday morning. The MASN dispute is over. Yes, the never-ending MASN dispute. It actually has finally ended. Monday morning, shocking announcement from the Nats and O's. A joint announcement. The announcement included the following quote: the Washington Nationals and Baltimore Orioles jointly announced the final resolution of all issues related to the MASN dispute. For the 2025 season, Washington Nationals games will continue to be televised locally, exclusively by the Mid-Atlantic Sports Network, parentheses MASN. Under a new one-year contract after this term, the Nationals will be free to explore alternatives for their television rights for the 2026 season and beyond. As part of the settlement, all disputes related to past media rights between the Nationals, Orioles, and MASN have been resolved, and all litigation will be dismissed, end quote. A whopper from the Nats and O's on Monday morning. And by the way, we on Monday morning also had a report from Forbes that the Nats have hired the New York City-based marketing and talent representation agency, Excel Sports Management, to sell the naming rights to Nationals Park and to sell a jersey patch sponsorship. The Nats, as many of you know, have been missing out on the revenue from these two avenues. Now maybe about to get that revenue. Monday, a big day in terms of financial news for the Nats, and Monday, a very good day if you're a Nats fan. Be happy, rejoice in the glorious news of Monday. So, as you may have noticed, our usual co-host of this podcast, the Nats insider Mark Zuckerman of MASNsports.com. He is not on this installment of the podcast. He'll be back with us for the next installment of the podcast. Just to be frank with you, Mark is an employee of MASN, so we don't want to put Mark in an awkward position. So it's very nice to have Tim helping us out here. And we have a lot to get to, Tim. This is such a big deal. And it's amazing, man, right? We, on the last installment of the podcast, had some fun with the Nats and O's on February 24th, the previous Monday morning, announcing that the two teams will conclude their 2025 exhibition seasons against each other. O's at the Nats at Nationals Park Monday afternoon, March 24th at 1:05. And we joked, okay, there is a thawing of the relationship here, but, the MASN dispute does continue and probably won't be ending anytime soon. Oh, no. The MASN dispute is over. What did you think when you saw that news on Monday morning?
I was stunned. This thing has been going on for so long. I'll give you a quick tale. When you and I worked together at ESPN 980, there was also Sports Talk 570, and the great Tom Lavero and I had a weekly baseball show called The Dugout. And our first episode was in November of 2013. And in the opening segment, the first topic I brought up to Tom, I said, Tom, when is this never-ending MASN dispute going to get resolved? Well, we have an answer, and it's March of 2025. For something that lasted so long, my biggest shock, Al, was how it just sort of came up out of nowhere. You would have thought that there would have been a slower process, leaks and things like that, and then final confirmation. But no, poof, out of nowhere, Monday morning, all legal issues resolved and on to the next chapter.
The two sides did a tremendous job of keeping this quiet. Nobody saw this coming, or at least nobody put it out there that he or she saw this coming. And it's not just that the MASN dispute is over. I mean, the specifics of this announcement really stand out. All disputes related to past media rights between the Nats, O's, and MASN have been resolved and all litigation is being dismissed. I don't know to what extent everyone followed the nitty-gritty of this saga. If you did follow it, God bless you, because it was a tedious, laborious saga. But there was so much to this, and that everything has been resolved really is significant. And then there's this coming season, the 2025 season, is set to be the final season for the Nats on MASN. They have a new one-year contract with MASN, and then are free to explore alternatives for their television rights for the 2026 season and beyond. The MASN dispute. MASN was created in 2005 to televise both Nats and Orioles games off the relocation of the Montreal Expos in the 04-05 offseason to Washington, D.C., what had been deemed Orioles broadcast territory. The thing about the MASN arrangement that will forever boggle my mind is that it was put in place in perpetuity. It was put in place so that the Orioles had control of the Nationals' local television rights in perpetuity. The truth is, the Washington, D.C. area had become Orioles territory to at least some degree because MLB did not have a team in D.C. 1972 through 2004. So to me, as someone who grew up in this area, the notion of doing something to placate Peter Angelos and the O's did make sense, but not in perpetuity. You know, you maybe set up something for, 10 years, maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years. But to have the language be that this is in place forever was ridiculous. That was so unfair to the Nats. That was so unfair to the Washington, D.C. market. And it always felt like, okay, even if somehow the Nats and O's become friendly again, if you're the O's, why would you ever give up having control of another MLB team's local television rights? And yet somehow, some way, this situation has been resolved. Now, neither side is putting out much of anything, and I don't anticipate either side leaking much of anything. So what are the terms of this being resolved? How exactly did this come to be resolved? We don't know, and I don't know that we're ever going to know. I will say this doesn't happen if the Orioles aren't sold to the David Rubenstein Group. If the O's are still owned by the Angelos family, ain't no way that we get the news that we got on Monday morning. David Rubenstein buying the O's ended up being outstanding news for the Nationals. So I think that's a big piece of this, and that Mark Lerner, the Nats managing principal owner, and David Rubenstein, the Orioles controlling owner, appear to have this cordial, if not friendly relationship. Big part of this. I mean, David Rubenstein's purchase of the O's got approved unanimously by MLB owners one day before opening day last year. In less than a year's time of him owning the O's, the MASN dispute ends up being resolved. What a great development for the Nats.
Great development for the Nats with Rubenstein coming in, new ownership, but also, and we're going to get to it, a very important part of it, also on Rubenstein's watch, was the declining value of RSNs. I want to stop throwing flowers towards the Rubenstein Group only from the standpoint that if RSNs and cable television were still in the up and up like 10, 15 years ago, I don't know if they would have been as motivated to make a deal.
That's an interesting thought. You may well be right. You know, what we also don't know is to what extent, if at all, was Rubenstein being allowed to buy the O's predicated on him finding an ending to this MASN dispute? And how much of what happened here goes on the commissioner, Rob Manfred? You know, how much of this was Manfred making it so that Rubenstein was compelled to come to some sort of resolution with the Lerner family? We don't know. Again, there's a lot here that we don't know. So, yeah, when it comes to who exactly deserves the flowers, you know, I don't know that we're ever going to have complete clarity on something like that. But clearly, this was not something that was anywhere close to happening with the Angelos family owning the O's. And now this happens with Rubenstein owning the O's, and the Nats can get control of their own local television. So the question of what now, I think, is fascinating. There are so many things here that could be in place. So first of all, does the MASN dispute now ending mean that the Lerner family selling the Nats is back in play? I think you start with that. We went through the near 2-year saga of the Nats being for sale. April 11th, 2022, we learned that the Lerner family had begun exploring selling the Nats. February 19th, 2024, President's Day 2024, we learned that the Lerner family was no longer exploring selling the Nats. I personally have never believed that the Nats were truly off the market. I think that if the right offer came along, the Nats would be sold. The belief is that the MASN dispute played a big-time role in depressing the sale price of the Nats. And that makes sense, right? Why pay top dollar for an MLB franchise that doesn't even control its own local television rights? Well, MASN dispute over. Nats gaining control of their local television rights, albeit in a very uncertain environment when it comes to local sports TV. But might the MASN dispute ending lead to the Lerner family selling the Nats? Is now the time that, say, Ted Leonsis does what he has talked about doing, buying the Nats and adding them to his empire of monumental sports and entertainment? Is now the time perhaps other bidders for the Nats emerge, seeing that the value of the Nats, in theory, is increasing with the team gaining control of its local television rights?
Well, let's start with that one, Al, because today everyone was talking about, once they heard the news, Leonsis, Ted Leonsis is going to buy the team, But it is a new world. The Nats have autonomous rights over their broadcast situation. So will there be more bidders? Obviously, the Lerner family are going to be the first group of people to explore that very situation. Is the team for sale, or will it be more for sale? I look no further than the words of Mark Lerner when less than a month ago at spring training to the Washington Post and leaving the door very much open toward we're in it unless something changes. Well, something certainly changed on Monday morning. And I do think that the team is back on the market. They might not say it, but it would just be very difficult to imagine that that is not the case. And in my opinion, the reason why they didn't sell the team was not only they didn't get the number that they wanted, because they didn't have their broadcast rights. As to the Ted Leonsis thing, he has said out loud, he was recently on Alex Rodriguez's podcast, saying that right now with Caps and Wizards, he's got 9 months of programming. He wants 12 months of programming. And he talked about the Nationals. He referred to the Nationals by name.
So with the Nationals, I look and I go, well, we have a platform. We just bought our network. Everyone's going to streaming. Streaming is about subscriptions.
Right now, the only RSN locally, regional sports network, is Monumental Network. So if you think that all those breadcrumbs are moving in that direction, it would be hard to ignore what seems like very clear signs in front of us.
The Mark Lerner quote that you referenced. So Lerner on February 17th spoke to Barry Zverluga, columnist for the Washington Post. The quotes ran in a piece that was published on February 18th. And Lerner said the following regarding his family's commitment to owning the Nats. Quote, "Our commitment is to continue to go forward. A sale is not on the list of things we worry about. We're excited about the team. We work too hard to get it, and we love what we're doing with it. And so unless something different happens along the way, we're in it for the long haul." End quote. And I made the point at the time, that was quite the qualifier. Unless something different happens along the way, we're in it for the long haul. Well, the MASN dispute has ended. I would say that that counts as something different happening along the way. Hey, Al Galdi here for Window Nation. The only thing more amazing than the MASN dispute finally ending is the latest great offer from Window Nation to listeners of the Nats Chat podcast. 2 free windows for every 2 windows that you buy, and you pay nothing until 2027. This offer is good for now through March 31st. Schedule your free estimate. Call 866-90Nation or visit windownation.com and tell Window Nation that you want the deal that you heard about from Al Galdi on the Nats Chat podcast. Window Nation windows are the best. Times are tough financially right now. One of the best investments that you can make is on home improvements, especially ones that increase the value of your home and save you money in the long run. Window Nation windows do just those things. 866-90Nation, windownation.com to Window Nation. That Al Galdi sent you, and make sure that you get the special offer. 2 free windows for every 2 windows that you buy. Pay nothing until 2027. 866-90Nation or windownation.com. That's 866-90Nation or windownation.com. And tell Window Nation that Al Galdi from the Nats Chat podcast sent you.
So with the Nationals, I look and I go, well, we have a platform. We just bought our network. Everyone's going to streaming. Streaming is about subscriptions. If you want to have a subscription, like at AOL back in the heyday, you didn't have mail available for 9 months out of the year. You have to have a year-round subscription. So I have felt that from a business standpoint, having a platform and having winter and summer programming is going to be critical to build value for the network, because you won't get the churn, right? Oh, you lost in the first round of the playoffs in April. I'm going to cancel my subscription and I'll sign back up when the new season starts. If you're in the playoffs and baseball is started, you're going to have a real good, strong subscription base. So from a business standpoint, it's very compelling. And then to be able to sell advertising indoors, outdoors, on television, cross-promote. But the real reason you want to do it is you want to win championships. And I think in this new world where there's all this money coming in the sports teams, and sports teams are being valued incredibly high, a football team in Washington, D.C., just sold for $6 billion to the smartest, wealthiest people who had to syndicate.
Right.
They couldn't afford it themselves.
Were you shocked by that price?
No, I think it's undervalued.
I have thought about this. If you are the Lerner family, especially if you are Mark Lerner, who supposedly is not among those in the Lerner family who wants to sell the team. Supposedly, there has been division within the Lerner ownership group regarding selling versus keeping the team. And supposedly, Mark Lerner has been in the camp of wanting to keep the team. So here you are now, the Lerner family. You've owned the team for nearly 20 years. The MASN dispute finally is over. Might you not want to reap the benefits of the MASN dispute being over? Might you not want to enjoy a world in which your team's local television rights belong to you and not to the Baltimore Orioles? Maybe the MASN dispute lessens the likelihood of the Nats being sold. Who the heck knows? A lot of ways that this could end up going. But there's also this, the state of RSNs. And you brought this up, and I think this is a huge component of all of this. People talk about the grass being greener. That analogy, that metaphor, that saying works, right? But green in this case is money, not grass. Given the extreme uncertainty right now with regional sports networks, which are not doing well, is it a certainty that the Nats, if/when they, after the 2025 season, exit being on MASN, will be better off financially, will be making more money than the Nats are making right now from what the Nats are getting from MASN on an annual basis, especially if they're not bought by Ted Leonsis? Because imagine this world. So like you said, there are only two RSNs in the DC area, MASN and Monumental Sports Network. Nats exit MASN, Monumental Sports Network is the only option in terms of an RSN. So it's not like the Nats have a ton of leverage in a circumstance like that. If the Nats are not purchased by Ted Leonsis and the Nats go to Monumental Sports Network, all of a sudden now, the Nats are on a network owned by someone who owns 3 teams on the network, but not the Nats. So could it be that the Nats, under the ownership of the Lerners, take a backseat on Monumental Sports Network to the teams actually owned by Ted Leonsis? Talking about the Capitals and the Wizards and, I don't know, maybe even the Mystics. I mean, who knows? So, I wonder about that. There is streaming, and that obviously is the way that things are going. But here's what's also true about streaming. It is not proven to be the moneymaker that a lot of entities were hoping that it would be. A lot of companies are still trying to figure out streaming and see if the kind of money that these entities were hoping could be made can be made via streaming. So again, uncertainty here. And the Nats, if they exit MASN after this upcoming season, are going to be cast out into the wilderness, right? But they're being sent out into the wilderness in a very uncertain time. What's unfortunate here is that the RSN boom, and that's what it was, a boom, is over. The RSN boom was about a decade ago, and the Nats missed out on it. It's one of the painful things about this situation. Teams made so much money off these RSNs. That's done. And so now what? That the Nats are being set free is good news, but they are being set free into a world that is very uncertain when it comes to local sports TV.
A very uncertain world. Let's look at opening day 2026. I know we haven't done opening day 2025 yet, but the Nats are on MASN for this season. So look towards next year, late March, early April. Where will Nats games be held? As I see it, I see 3 options. 2 are much likelier than the final one. The first is, of course, they go to Monumental Network, regardless of who the owner is, but nonetheless, the games are on Monumental, and that's their summer programming. And now they're on a local RSN, a station that's on in local sports bars all the time, a station that's also on YouTube TV, which is a significant thing, by the way, that MASN currently is not. And I see a lot of complaining about that on social media. The second option, as I see, is if you are familiar with the Padres and the Diamondbacks, and Cleveland's about to enter this situation where they've lost their RSN. I mean, they could not agree to a deal with their local framework, and they're basically on the MLB umbrella, and it costs $100 a year, which you get through MLB TV, which I, by the way, think is a great deal. $100 a year for 162 games. The final option, and I don't think this is likely, but it wouldn't shock me if this happened in 2026, is that the Nats are on MASN again. Maybe not 2027 and 2028, but if the learners want to set up a bidding situation for Monumental and say, hey, you can't just throw any number you want at us, we're in no rush to leave, that would be ironic given how long the Nats have tried to extricate themselves, but that wouldn't surprise me either.
In 2015, 2016, when I would talk about the MASN dispute, what I always talked about as the dream scenario was the Nats get out of this arrangement and start their own RSN. And so we have the Nats with their own channel, the way that the Mets have their own channel in SNY, the Yankees have their own channel in Yes. And you could have not just Nats games on this channel and Nats pregame and postgame shows on this channel, but all kinds of ancillary Nats programming on this channel. You ain't starting an RSN in 2025. That is financial suicide at this point. So what do you do? How do you go about doing this? You brought up the Guardians scenario. That is appealing. $100 to watch every Guardians game via streaming. That's, I think, a terrific deal. But from a club perspective, you're not making massive money doing that. You know how many subscribers you would need to make, 90, 100, 110, 120 million dollars per year charging $100 via streaming? That would seem like a tall task. So you have this level of, as a fan, what's best for you, which I think is what most people care about. And I don't blame you for looking at it that way. But you also have, from a club perspective, what makes the most sense, how you generate the most revenue. And it's not exactly clear what that path would be. When you say the Nats being back on MASN for at least the 2026 season, I don't think that is that far-fetched. And I think if you're the Nats, you don't burn the MASN bridge. I think you keep that open, if for no other reason, to have some kind of leverage if you go into a negotiation with Monumental Sports Network and you have not been purchased by Ted Leonsis. I think one of the first dominoes to fall here is going to be, do the Nats get sold? Because in theory, a sale could happen quickly now. But we have to see. It may be that the Nats don't get sold. And so if they don't get sold, then I think that does bring about some more uncertainty. But I think it is exciting to think about what this could mean. Because look, the MASN situation was not healthy for anyone. It was never a good arrangement to begin with. And the truth about MASN is this. It is run on the cheap. It just is. Everyone knows this. MASN is a network that has had so little in the way of ancillary programming. I mean, MASN for years has essentially been Nats and Orioles games, Nats and Orioles pregame and postgame shows, and that's it, right? Like college basketball and college football games, ESPN News, infomercials. There was a weekday talk show called the Mid-Atlantic Sports Report. I used to watch it. There were 2 Saturday morning baseball talk shows. I used to watch those. But those shows went away years ago now. MASN has been run on the cheap. And I say that as a shot at the Angelos family. That's not a shot at the people working for MASN. MASN has a number of excellent people working for it. The people who work for MASN are very good at what they do. But if you just watch MASN, and if you ever watch any of these other RSNs, especially when RSNs were going strong, you really notice a difference. About 15 years ago, I had DirecTV. And DirecTV for a while gave me some free package where I got all these RSNs from across the country. And I watched these RSNs. I watched SNY and Yes Network and CSN Chicago and a bunch of others. And I could not believe what I was watching because I was so used to MASN that I was like, I thought that's how it was. That's not how it is. These other networks had so many shows. Do you know how many Yankee shows are on Yes? Do you know how many Met shows are on SNY? So many great talk shows that you can engage in where you hear about the baseball teams. And that stuff is invaluable when it comes to growing the fan bases, when it comes to sparking conversation about the teams. That's how you grow a team and a sport in an area. It's not just about carrying games. It's about inducing conversation. It's about making people aware of what's happening, making it so that people have opinions on what's happening, debating what's happening with the team. You get so little of that. If you are a Nats fan, you have been underserved in this market for way too long. And I really hope that the MASN dispute ending brings an end to Nats fans being underserved. Look, one of the reasons you started this podcast is because Nats fans are underserved in this area. And the MASN situation has been a big part of that.
Certainly has. And, Nats fans have caught just every batch of bad luck you can get when it comes to media, right? And this would sort of go along with that. But just one other thing, as I sort of see it, for those fans who are lamenting, why is the timing so bad? What bad luck? Just also remember, let's just say theoretically, a couple months ago, Rob Manfred and Mark Lerner and David Rubenstein got into a room and they said, all right, let's figure this out. Rob Manfred wants to get this resolved, not only wants it resolved, but clean up a mess that his predecessor couldn't wrap up, which every high-level executive wants to do. We know why the Nats wanted out of MASN. We are seeing why the Orioles probably did, as they were projected over the next few years, wait, we have a declining asset here. The sooner we sell, the better. So I just want to kind of remind fans of that don't sort of think of it as what bad luck. It all came together, and that's why we are here today.
For sure. And, it took way too long. I mean, if you are a Nats fan and you're bitter about this, I don't blame you. If you're the Lerner family and you're bitter about this, I don't blame you. Although, the Lerner family bought the team in 2006, bought the team as MASN was already in place, so you kind of knew what you were getting into. But, I would think that the Lerner family thought, okay, yeah, there's this MASN situation, but at some point this thing is going to come to an end. I think we all kind of felt that, right? Again, this idea of it being forever, for it being in perpetuity just always seemed so ridiculous. And, you reference Bud Selig. That's who I put the MASN dispute on, even more so than Peter Angelos. I mean, there's no halo over the head of Peter Angelos, but he to me did what any other, gangster owner would have done. You try to protect your territory and you act in a selfish way. You do what is in your best interest, not in the best interest of your coworker or of your company, in this case of your league. So the onus was on the commissioner. The onus was on MLB to police that behavior from Peter Angelos. And instead, Bud Selig bent over backwards. He did a hot yoga pose to placate Peter Angelos. And I just never understood that. You could have placated Angelos while at the same time not doing the Nats dirty the way they got done in this arrangement. Again, make it so that MASN is in place for 15 years, okay, maybe 20 years. But then that's it. There has to be an end date. And there wasn't. And that was a big part of the problem. But thankfully, this is over. I don't think there are nearly as many answers as there are questions coming out of all of this from a Nationals perspective. But I do think there's reason for excitement. I'm guessing you can sense in my voice, there is excitement here because, you think about the possibilities. This could be a really good thing. And, you take a step back, right? Nats, in theory, coming out of a rebuild. What if the Nats are getting really good? Their TV situation is about to improve big time in some way, and you're about to get new ownership. Let's say all three of those things converge over the next few years. New ownership, new television situation that's really good, and the team becomes really good. All three things colliding. I mean, think about that as a development for a Nats fan in the coming months/years.
I know we're in the weeds here, and I know that we're throwing a lot of cold water on some of this stuff just because we're diving through the facts. But yes, the overwhelming sentiment is Nats fans should be thrilled today. This is a new day. This had to happen, should have been resolved years ago, and it wasn't, and it finally is now. To your Bud Selig thing, I just want to, if I could quickly dive into that, and I'm with you that certainly there should have been a cap on it, whether it was 10, 15, or 20 years. As I see it and look back on it, he should have just gone into a room with Angelos and said, we're not leaving until we figure this out. And I will write it, whatever check needs to be written will be written. And I know that Angelos had all the cards. And if you go back to it, things were so bad in Montreal, if people don't know about this, that MLB owned the Expos. I mean, they had control of the team. There was no one who wanted to own the team. And there was no other city that they could have moved to other than Washington, D.C. Nashville wasn't an option then. And then I don't remember the exact political machinations, but city council approved a stadium deal, and all of a sudden there was a brief window to get it done. But I agree. I'll never forgive him for just not basically locking him and Angelos in a room and reaching a resolution. And he created a problem that had no solution until technology stepped in 20 years later.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Angelos was a bull of a lawyer. He was very good at what he did as a lawyer. That's how he made his money. And Bud Selig was known as someone who liked to make deals, but was a schmoozer and wasn't necessarily someone who was going to stand up to someone like a Peter Angelos. You know, Bud wanted everyone on the same page, everyone feeling good about things. To your point, the Nats situation, the Expo situation was a mess. And so, yeah, I think they kind of put this thing together and shoved it all in and didn't necessarily think about, long-term what was happening here. And the Orioles got a steal of a deal. Although, I would argue that MASN hasn't exactly served the Orioles particularly well either. So, it could be that the O's actually end up coming out of this in a better way than people anticipated. Another thing, too, is this, and I've seen this. I've seen Orioles fans say, well, the Nats agreed to this deal. No, they didn't. The Nats were owned by MLB. The Lerners didn't buy the Nats until 2006. So when people say, well, the Nats agreed to this deal, who? MLB? MLB owned the Nats when the team got relocated. So I get a kick out of that. Like, it's not even like the Lerners had a voice in this or the Nats had a true voice in this. Like, it was, hey, this is the deal, and this is what it has to be. And it was like, okay, now figure it out. And it feels like for basically 20 years, the team has been trying to figure it out. So we'll see. We get what could be coming, and that is that the Nats could be sold. We also get that the Nats could not be sold. We get that the Nats could be going to Monumental Sports Network. We also get that may not happen. Maybe streaming is the way that this ends up happening. We don't know. There's a lot that's up in the air, but we do know this. The MASN dispute is done, and one of the more ridiculous, absurd situations in the history of Washington, D.C. area sports, a situation that first cropped up in April 2012 comes to an end in March 2005 and comes to an end out of nowhere. I don't know that there was a person on the planet, at least someone who is not like an employee of MASN, who knew that announcement was coming on Monday morning. That really was something.
And one other thing, while we're talking just sort of broad strokes about possible ownership changes or things like that, and what this could mean for the franchise, I do want to say that as of now, on paper, if you're thinking about this, the Nats lease at Nationals Park is through 2054. So just the Nats are in the district for, this next generation. So you don't have to worry about that if the ownership were to change hands.
Yeah, and Washington, D.C. is a top 10 media market. MLB would be nuts to ever even entertain the thought of someone trying to relocate the team.
When I say DC, I mean actual DC. I'm referring to like potentially moving to Alexandria, for instance.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Listen, the drama that we had in the Nats getting Nats Park, if you're DC, you don't want the team ever leaving there because a lot went into that, as you referenced. Well, we are anxious to hear from you. You can hit us up on X at Nats_chat. You can hit us up on Blue Sky at Nats Chat Podcast. You can email the show, natschatpodcast@gmail.com. Like we have been saying, a lot of different layers to this, a lot of levels to this, a lot of ways that you can attack the big news from Monday morning. MASN dispute over. We have a website you can check out as well, natschatpodcast.com, at which you can purchase a Nats Chat Podcast t-shirt. All Nationals radio highlights on Nats Chat, courtesy of 106.7 The Fan. For Tim Schobers, I'm Al Galdi. We'll talk to you next time on the Nats Chat Podcast.